Yep, here he is.
There he is on the screen.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, right here.
Connie Lewin's on the call.
Shalom,
Well,
Daniel.
already 100
I just
people
wanted to
on.
have these few minutes to say hi to you from Eugene, Poland, which is a city
Hi, everyone.
a Jewish city historically in play.
Here we come.
Close to the border.
You need to hear all these people.
No,
it's okay. It'll come back. It'll come back. Don't touch anything.
I'm going to mute you so that we can begin shortly.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I've just taken the liberty of muting you. Also, I'm using an iPad, so the camera is off center. So unfortunately, I can't look at the camera properly, or I'll do my best. But anyway, it's really good to be with you. So we'll wait a few minutes to allow people to enter the waiting room. And I'll do my best to manage the Zoom conversation. I'm a little bit out of practice because of my sabbatical, and I'm doing everything in Polish here. So it's really good to see you, though. So welcome. My only concern is that it seems to be capping participation at 100. That shouldn't be the case, but if there are people who are trying to log on who can't seem to join because it's capping attendance at exactly 100, and I apologize for that, you can view this in simulcast on YouTube Live. On my personal YouTube channel. So if you just go to youtube.com/Rabbi Blake, you should be able to see this as well. I'm gonna just text my team and let them know that I think that seems to be the case though. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll give everyone a chance to unmute in a few minutes. This is just a brief update, but I'm really happy that you're here. It's so nice to see you. I put you on gallery view just so I can see the many faces of people I know and love, and now I feel right at home. Even though I'm pretty far away, I see my mom and dad here. Hi, they're waving. So I'm greeting you from the Warsaw Marriott, and we've been here. I've kind of lost track of time. We flew out late Saturday night. We landed Sunday, so that's yesterday, and it's Monday. And I haven't slept much, so this will be a brief update because it's 10:30 here. We're 5 hours ahead. Poland won't go on daylight savings time for another couple of weeks. So we're actually only 5 hours ahead of you in New York, if you're in New York. As I think most of you know, because you're here, I've joined a delegation of rabbis and a few staff and volunteers from UJA Federation of New York. We just actually had dinner and conversation with delegates from another federation mission from JFNA from Jewish Federations of North America. So there are a number of other Federation participants from all over the US and Canada who are with us as well here in the hotel. They're on the similar itinerary to ours, except a day apart. So they're going down to the border tomorrow. We did that today. And I'll just give you a brief recap. So I was invited to participate in this trip on Tuesday. We had about 3 hours to signal whether or not we would be willing and available. I said yes, of course. And I feel really honored and moved to bring the wishes of our local Jewish community to the people of Ukraine and the humanitarian relief volunteers from all over Poland and Europe, though most of the volunteers that we've met are doing their work from their home in Poland, including many in the Jewish community of Poland, which is small but determined, and many volunteers from Israel have been on our itinerary of people to meet, and we've met many other people who are doing the work of refugee assistance, Jewish and not Jewish alike, though obviously a focus on the Jewish organizations that are doing this work, because one of the important cohering themes of our trip has been to see how the UJA Federation assists its grantee organizations. So we met with the chief rabbi of Poland, who mobilized the JCC of Warsaw on about 2 weeks' notice before the war broke out to assist with refugee resettlement, including repurposing RVs to drive to the border and convey refugees away from the border area to more in Poland locations. We met with the Jewish Agency, or JAFE, Jewish Agency for Israel, which is actually assisting those Ukrainian Jews who qualify for and who wish to make Aliyah. So our first stop tomorrow morning will be to send off with our blessings the next plane full of Jewish refugees who are leaving Ukraine, have been in Poland for processing basically, and are on their way to Israel on a flight tomorrow morning. So we are actually leaving the hotel at 6 a.m. to send off another group of Olim, or people who are making Aliyah, immigrants to Israel. We've met with representatives of the JDC. There's a big alphabet soup of Jewish organizations here. So that's the Joint Distribution Committee, which does a lot of disaster assistance work on the front lines in this crisis and in many previous crises. And in fact, it was a JDC volunteer who oriented us to the border this morning when we made our way to the villages along the border between Poland and Ukraine, including Przemysl, which is a small city right on the border with Ukraine. And then we made our way down to Medica, which is another village that is a major crossing site for refugees who are actually coming over on foot from Ukraine. What I can tell you is that, the journey has been equal parts inspiring, heartbreaking, and bewildering. The work of those who have mobilized to accept refugees is incredible. Looks like we're getting some more people here. So somebody on the back end, I'm willing to bet one of my clergy colleagues may have helped to adjust the settings on Zoom. So give me just a minute. I'm going to let a few more people into the room, and welcome if you're just joining us. I've only just begun to share a few words of greeting and appreciation for your presence here, and then I'll just open it up for questions. So we spent the first day, that was yesterday, after landing, immediately interacting with Jewish representatives and organizations that are doing refugee assistance work. Some of that is collecting donations and assisting with humanitarian supplies. We traveled with tons of medical and other necessities as guided by AFIA, a wonderful foundation. And if you go to AFIA, I'll put all of these links in the chat before we conclude this evening. But if you go to afiafoundation.org, they have a continually updated list of materials that are desired for refugee assistance. One of the things I learned, by the way, is that it is not particularly helpful, or it creates extra work to send a box or a bag of mixed supplies. So if you have a few leftover sweatpants, and you have some diapers, and you have some Tylenol, and you want to get rid of all of it, that's not the best way to send it. The best thing to do is to go to afiafoundation.org, see what the needs are first. And if you're choosing to donate goods, follow the list. And it's best to package everything of similar type together. So all medication, or all feminine products, or all clothing of a certain type. That way the volunteers don't have to spend precious hours sorting and redirecting the goods. In every place that we visited yesterday, and these were 4 separate Jewish organizations, those that are collecting supplies to assist the refugees have converted over large portions of whatever facilities out of which they're operating into storage units. And it's all sorted by type. So there's a whole room full of just bedding. There's a whole room full of just clothing. There's a whole room full of just diapers. And that's just one day's collection. So the materials keep coming in, and the best thing to do is to, again, take guidance from the organizations through which you're donating. I'm recommending Afia Foundation just because I think it's doing a great job leading this effort, and because they're coordinating with UJA. And honestly, and I'll probably say this more than once this evening, every organization affirms that money is probably still the most effective way of helping refugees. So if you are in the position to make generous contributions to any of the organizations that I will, again, put in the chat window, by all means, please do so, because it is the most effective way that organizations can target their expenditures to assist with the needs that the refugees are experiencing at any given moment. By the time we got to Lublin, it was late last night, and we met at the Ilan Hotel, which formerly, before 2013, the Ilan Hotel had been given back to the Jewish community after being expropriated by the Nazis. In its heyday, what is now the Ilan Hotel was the Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, or the Great Yeshiva of the Sages of Lublin, which was one of the major centers of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, and started by Rav Meir Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro may be familiar to you, if not by name, then by some of his other accomplishments. It is Rabbi Shapiro who established the custom of Daf Yomi, which means studying one page of Talmud every day. So if you know anyone, or you've heard of anyone who studies one page of Talmud every day for 7 years, that custom was started by a rabbi from Lublin, which is in eastern Poland, near the border of Belarus. I commented in my video, some of you have had a chance to see it, that being in Lublin is as close as I've ever come to the place where my great-grandparents on both sides of my family come from, Minsk and Pinsk. It's an easy mnemonic for my family that the mom's side comes from Minsk and pop's side comes from Pinsk. And being in Lublin was meaningful. We actually davened, we prayed the Mariv prayer service after we ate dinner together. They have a glatt kosher restaurant in what is a hostel now, or a hotel. And amazingly, in the last month, this entire facility has been converted over into a refugee resettlement center. So there are many refugees who are staying there, and they're distributing goods. The whole basement floor of the hotel has been converted over to storing necessities for the refugees. That was our last stop last night. This morning, and some of you have been following me and this trip on social media are probably aware of this. I didn't post many pictures today, mostly out of respect for the people with whom we are interacting. So yesterday was more about meeting the representatives of the Jewish community that are doing the work. And these people, both professionals and volunteers, are absolutely incredible. And the way in which the Polish community and the Polish Jewish community has mobilized is really, really inspiring. Today, we were driven to the border, first to Przemysl, which has a really challenging spelling. It's I believe Prezmysl. It's pronounced Shemishal. We met with a medic from Israel who works for an organization called Natan, Natan, which does disaster relief work. We were given orange vests so that we could be identified as relief workers. I think I had an orange vest that on the back in Polish said psychological help. So I didn't know if I was the one who was expected to dispense it or to receive it. Probably needed a little bit of both. But we put on our vests. And then after our briefing with Mike and his Polish volunteers working with Natan, we were taken to an emergency refugee processing and relief center. Have any of you ever, I'm sure many of you have been to the Cross County Mall, and you know that there's like part of the old part of the Cross County Mall is like a 2-story building, and there's a sporting goods store in there, and there's like a home goods store in there, and there used to be a Circuit City. That was the kind of facility where we were taken. Up until just a few weeks ago, it was a shopping center from like out of the early 1980s. And you could still see the signs of like this storefront is a hair salon, and over here is a home goods store. Everything has been reconfigured to accept refugees. So wall to wall with mattresses and bedding on the floor. Almost exclusively women and children are the refugees. The only men there were volunteers and Polish law enforcement and military personnel who are keeping the place safe and checking who comes in and out. As we approached, all sorts of different organizations, volunteers from around Europe, have set up kiosks where you can get hot food or any kind of food that you can imagine, all sorts of necessities and supplies. You can stop at a kiosk just to charge your cell phone for a while. This is all for the refugees, all for them to use. But inside the building, of course, is the face of just, the humanitarian catastrophe up close. So it's hard to put into words what it was like. And I didn't want to be voyeuristic, so I didn't take any pictures or, stare at the refugees. We mostly met with the professionals. We spoke to a few refugees who were in conversation with some of the doctors. One had a 90-year-old mother, another had a child who's being treated for cancer in Ukraine, and of course, has had to leave Ukraine, has no access to the medical treatment that he was receiving. So, every story could break your heart. And I guess the total effect is just shattering. But it was still important that we go. And one of the most challenging conversations we had was with an English-speaking volunteer who said, if you're only coming to look and then leave in a few hours, that's nothing more than crisis tourism, and we don't want you here. But if you are able to send a message that will bring help directly to us, or even better, if you know anyone who is able to give a week or 2 weeks of one's time to come to the border and support our efforts, we need everyone we can get. So that was a really hard conversation and a really important conversation. And it was hard to leave. I think we only had 15 minutes in the refugee center itself, and it kind of felt like an eternity in an important way. After that, it's hard to remember anything that happened after that. We had kind of a long piecemeal drive back to Warsaw throughout much of the afternoon. We did meet with another incredible Jewish leader, a gentleman named Tzvi Sperber, who's from London, who runs an educational organization that brings youth to Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe to learn about the Shoah, to learn about the Holocaust. It's called J Roots, the letter J plus Roots. And again, just in the last 4 weeks, J Roots has completely changed its entire operational model to provide refugee assistance. So the tour buses that they were using to take Jewish high school kids to the concentration and extermination camps are now being used to bring refugees away from these crisis centers on the border to more sustainable conditions a little bit farther away from the border. An added dimension that I hadn't picked up from watching the news for the last several weeks to the humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding is that there's actually more space for refugees and more countries that are willing to take refugees right now than there are refugees who are willing to leave the area of the border between Poland and Ukraine. Because you have to understand, almost all of the refugees are women with their children or with their aging mothers. And they think, or they hope, perhaps they hope against hope, that they're going to be reunited with their husbands and fathers and grandfathers very soon. None of us knows, and a few of us, like me, don't believe that that's an entirely realistic hope, at least not for the numbers of people we're talking about. And eventually the area of the border will just not be able to sustain the population influx. Even Warsaw itself, which is a city of a couple million, has absorbed over 300,000 refugees from Ukraine. That swells the population in Warsaw to more than 15%. So anywhere you go in Warsaw, any hotel you go to is accepting refugees who are congregating in the lobbies, who are using the Wi-Fi to connect with their loved ones back home or elsewhere, who are simply coming in for a cup of coffee. And a lot of hotels have set up makeshift stations for helping refugees feel acclimated and welcomed. Probably the most fascinating was the Novotel, just a 10-minute walk from where I'm sitting tonight in Warsaw, which the Jaffe, the Jewish Agency for Israel, has converted into Israeli diplomatic territory for processing olim, for processing Jewish Ukrainians who are making aliyah. They've already processed over 800 Jewish Ukrainians. And there are many thousands, tens of thousands of Jews who are fleeing Ukraine and who are still in Ukraine. We finally got back to Warsaw at around 7 o'clock tonight. We did a quick change and met up with the Jewish Federation of North America delegation downstairs for dinner, and met with a number of other leaders of the Jewish end of the refugee assistance effort, including the chief rabbi of Moscow, who was also the president of the Conference of European Rabbis, one Rabbi Goldschmidt, who explained to us that most of the Jews, and again, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jews still living in Russia, most of them want to leave. And it is not certain whether many or any will be able to leave. Right now, the only, so this is another aspect of the crisis that isn't getting covered on the news, which is that there's an additional population of Jews who are in Russia who do not want to be in Russia, who do not support Putin, who are horrified at the massacre of Ukrainians, and who believe that this is, you know, in part another European Jewish catastrophe for them. They would very much like to leave, but right now the only viable routes of exit from Russia are through Turkey, Kazakhstan, or Uzbekistan. And that is not an easy way to get out of Russia. Most of them want to go to Israel. And so he, Rabbi Goldschmidt, is leading the effort to see what refugee assistance he can provide for those Jews in Russia who want to leave their country. But as you know, Russia is it's not simple to get out of Russia these days. But their economy is crashing, and their opportunities for safety and freedom are diminishing by the hour. So that's some of the really hard news from my trip here. It has been intermingled with the beauty of meeting people who are devoting of their time, their heart, their soul, their money to assist some of the neediest people on God's earth. And it is also leavened by being with a really sweet, very menschy, very loving, very collegial group of interdenominational Jewish colleagues. I can't tell you how special it is to travel with Orthodox, conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist rabbis. And the only thing that seems to be a matter of disagreement among us is the order of the count-off when we got on the bus in the morning. We're not very good at that. But it's a truly exceptional group of colleagues. I feel blessed to be in their presence. the leadership of UJA Federation of New York has been absolutely exceptional. We have been well cared for. We've had excellent security. There's been really rigorous COVID security as well, at least in terms of flying in and out. We had to all get swabbed this evening before dinner so that we could fly tomorrow. And my colleague, Rachel Timoner, who's the rabbi of Beth Elohim in Brooklyn, emerged. It was one at a time. She emerged from the swabbing room at the hotel with a little makeshift room with Polish officials who were, doing the swabbing. And she said, "It's the brain swab." So we all had our brains swabbed earlier today. We're doing our best to stay cautious. We're grateful that it's March and not the way things looked in January, for sure. That's my update, and I'd love to invite you to share maybe the best way to do this, because we have over 200 people on the Zoom tonight, and God bless you for being with us on Zoom. Maybe the best thing to do would just be to raise a digital hand if you want to ask a question, and I'm happy to stay on for another 15 minutes or so, because I've taken a little bit more time than I had planned to giving you the briefing. But I hope you'll appreciate that I'm kind of spilling here because it's very raw. This isn't like giving a sermon where I've had time to think about what the message is, though. By way of concluding, I'll share a message too. So, and we also have some nice comments. Thank you for the notes on Zoom. Some in Ukraine are angry at Israel, right? So Dvora asks, again, it's not all. Some feel in Ukraine that Israel could be doing more, and particularly Israel could be taking a tougher line with Russia. And having met with the chief rabbi of Moscow tonight, and also one of the delegates at our dinner tonight was the Israeli ambassador to Ukraine. And he spoke to us too. And the best I can tell you is it's complicated. They are trying their best to keep the balance in their world order as well, recognizing that Russia is also the largest patron, militarily speaking, of Syria, which resides on Israel's northeastern border, and it could inflict considerable damage on Israel as well. So Israel, as usual, being in the neighborhood in which it finds itself, is in a very tricky spot, geopolitically speaking. And that's the best I can tell you, is that there's a sense from many Ukrainians that Israel and some of the West is not doing enough. I mean, we've heard a lot about the desire for a no-fly zone and for more military aircraft to be sent, and all of these have to be weighed very carefully against the possibility of further igniting a global conflagration, which is obviously the thing that's holding back the United States, Israel, and other Western powers from what could be an escalation of the conflict. And even a noted left-leaning journalist like Nick Kristof has come out urging caution in that direction. Thank you, Bob and Debbie, for putting the link to the AFIA Foundation Ukraine campaign. And thank you, Barbara, for noting Project Kesher is indeed a wonderful organization that has worked in Ukraine for a long time, and the donations there are great. And like I said, I'll put something in the chat window too. UJA Federation of New York and UJA Federation, Jewish Federations of North America, both have relief funds set up. It's been amazing. In fact, our local federation has already released over $5 million in emergency assistance for the crisis in Ukraine. So I'm just looking here to see if anyone else has a hand up. And because I'm not used to doing this on Zoom, if you do have your hand up, let me see. I don't see, I'm going to try and admit more people into the Zoom. We have a big room. Or you can just, if you want to unmute yourself and offer a word or a comment at this time, I'd certainly welcome it.
Rabbi, can you hear us?
Yep, we hear you. Hi, Alan. Hi, Susie.
Hi, Rabbi. It's a wonderful thing that you're doing, and God bless you. Thank you. I do have one question. Did you sense, in talking with any of the Russian people, if you saw any, or any Russian military, if you had the chance, that they were opposed to what Putin is doing?
Didn't see any. The only military personnel we've seen on this trip has been Polish. And so, no, I mean, you probably heard about a bombing by Russian artillery very close to the border with Ukraine just a couple of days ago. Our only exposure to that was having arrived shortly after that catastrophic assault, was to learn about the people who were injured, killed, or otherwise displaced by that bombing, and who are coming over the border at exactly the border point crossings that we visited this morning. But we've had no interactions whatsoever with any Russian military personnel, with no Russians actually. The only exception being the chief rabbi of Moscow, who informed us of his complex relationship with Russia, and the Jewish community's complex relationship with Russia, especially right now. Barbara?
Thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to know, have you got a sense from the Polish people themselves of how they feel if there are these hundreds of thousands of settlers, that can the country absorb that many people? And, it's an emergency situation now, but many of them will settle there, maybe. And what their reaction is.
It's fascinating right now. You're not seeing this as a divisive issue. It's a rallying point. It's an issue around which the Polish community seems to be fairly aligned. Again, right now, things are very raw and very fresh. Everywhere you go, though, we have met Polish people who are wearing blue and yellow ribbons in solidarity with Ukraine. Every hotel and every facility we visited has signs and people who are wearing buttons that say, "We stand with Ukraine." There are posters all over Warsaw and the other cities we visited that you can even recognize the words, even though they're in Polish, which is, not like a Romance language. I don't just intuitively kind of get what it's saying, but you can recognize the words that say solidarity with Ukraine. It's very obvious, and just the use of the yellow and blue colors. I didn't mention this morning, but and most of the relief workers we're meeting are Polish. And so right now, there seems to be a swell of welcome. Some of the press has been about, for instance, the mayor of the town that we visited this morning in Medzka, which is right on the border. And where we visited, I didn't mention this, but we visited the train station. And it is just wall-to-wall human beings, all trying to connect by their phones with their loved ones, trying to figure out where they're going to sleep that night, trying to figure out what their next meal is going to be, congregating in every square inch of available space in this beautiful 19th century Polish train station near the border. The mayor of that village, interestingly enough, has been applauded for his welcoming stance toward the refugees, but some journalists have been digging up the fact that not long ago, he was outspoken in his opposition to immigration from exactly the place where the refugees are coming from, Ukraine. And even echoing some of the language of former President Trump, had a campaign slogan called "Build the Wall," desiring to build a wall between Poland and Ukraine. But this circumstance has really changed that for him and for many other community leaders. The stance right now that we perceive is one of open arms. Once you start seeing, population centers overrun for months at a time, which we expect might be the case, especially if, for instance, we learned that the Netherlands was trying to fill a bus with refugees to take them to Amsterdam. They couldn't fill a bus of 39 people because the women who are at the border simply don't want to leave Poland. They want to wait out the crisis in the hopes of being reunited. If and when that starts to change, we may see a change in public attitudes. But again, this is all very fresh right now. But it has been really heartening to see how the Polish people are standing by the side of their neighbor. There's also, I would say, I don't want to make this all, happy and positive. A lot of this is driven by a kind of unifying hatred of Vladimir Putin. And I think the Poles recognize that in Putin, they also have a threat very close to their borders, and Belarus too, which is allied with Russia. So Poland, I think, sees it as in their best interest that Ukraine must be their ally against a really evil enemy.
Rabbi, this is Michael.
Yes. Hey, Michael.
Hi there. Do you feel, or the Polish people that you're speaking to, expressing fear that this will end up on in their land?
Possibly. I mean, again, I think that there's a sense of we're taking it not just one day at a time, but 1 minute at a time. Every place we visited is viewing this crisis as just unfolding at such an alarming pace that the most important thing they can be doing is getting supplies and personnel to the people who need it. And that seems to be the theme, that it is. And again, where will we be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks from now? I think if you talk to pundits, not people who are involved in refugee relief, but people who are, analyzing this from a larger geopolitical, sociological lens, I'm sure that there are people who are already concerned that the warm embrace of the Poles may begin to chill if they realize that their country is in an unsustainable position with the sheer numbers of people who are flooding in. But as of right now, that's not where the focus seems to be. And again, I'm speaking in broad brushstrokes only from, again, I don't really know how long we've been here, but it's been less than 48 hours. So.
Rabbi, hi, this is Nort Rosenzweig. I was wondering.
Hey, Nort. Hey, Linda.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Okay. Good to see you.
The rabbi from Russia, he's in Poland right now. Is he feel free to travel back and forth? Is he not going back to Russia?
That's a really good question. And he was mobbed by admirers from among my conservative and Orthodox colleagues who know him. And so I wasn't able to ask him. He only held forth with us for 10 minutes, but I did get his email, so I will ask. I can't imagine that it is easy for him to travel back and forth between Poland and Moscow. I think that especially as a Jew, he probably needs to be expatriate right now.
Hi, it's Don Rutherford, if you can hear me.
Yep,
Hi,
I hear you.
I sent you a note. I don't know whether it got through, but what kind of a sense do you get from Rabbi Goldschmidt about what the Russians really know of what's going on? And are they making any effort to kind of spread the word throughout Russia to those who have no access to any kind of news, so that the people hopefully will be somewhat educated and will join the protests?
Yeah, all he was willing to say to us is that the Russian community has Putin's number and has for a long time, the Russian Jewish community, that is. But the problem is it being a fairly closed totalitarian society that has become considerably more autocratic, in which, as you reference here, has really made significant efforts to constrain free press in the last year. The ability to get the message out is kind of an unknown. All he would allude to is the fact that many Russians are trying to leave, and they're trying to go through Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But that's all we learned on that aspect of the crisis. Hi, Mary.
Jonathan?
Yep, and then I'll get a few more hands.
Hi.
Yep.
Okay, a couple of things. One, I was watching Nicole Wallace this afternoon, and she did mention exactly what you mentioned about the women not wanting to go far from the Polish border in hopes of reuniting. I wanted to bring up, I have some AFIA notes in there. I'm working with Danielle a little bit. Anyway, and separate from that, is, I just want to offer out what I see and thought about and synthesized separate from everything else. When we cross Russians at home, in our travels, in our business, they're not Putinites.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned that in the coming weeks, there's going to be a lot of hate directed towards them the way there are to Asians with COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to mention a way to bear that in mind, and anyone related to national security in any level or whatever, that we
I appreciate
sort of
that very much. I think you're right on. I think that it would be not Jewish to exercise a discriminatory approach against an entire people because of the misguided evil of their leader. Again, we could talk ad nauseum about the connections between what we're experiencing and the Purim story. I've been drawn to that narrative. I guess I go wherever the Jewish calendar tells me to go. But as I said in my video message, a couple lessons from Purim just jump out at me. One, which is that evil is real, and the Jewish people of all people are charged with understanding that. And that when it comes to certain, moral black and whites, that it is okay to speak in moral absolutes. We're Jewish people, and we should be as vigorous in championing the good as we are in fighting the evil. And what Putin is doing is evil. And if this is not the work of a Haman or a Haman, then I don't know what in our lifetime would be. But I will tell you that if you read all of the book of Esther, and you make it all the way to the 9th chapter, it has a very disturbing ending, because it ends with Jewish people who are liberated from Haman's genocidal decree going out and massacring tens of thousands of ordinary people in Persia. Exactly. And so there's the danger that you're talking about, Mary. So we have to be very careful that we not paint with broad brushstrokes. And even those Russians, by the way, who support the war, I think we have to go in with the mindset that they are, they are only being given information that would allow them to take that position. So
right.
I want to acknowledge a couple more hands.
The ones who are leaving, by the way, as you mentioned, all the ones who are trying to get out, when they get out, they're not going to have access to their MasterCard and Visa card and bank money, by the way, which is another problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Huge problem. I mean, there's talk today about Russia trying to nationalize McDonald's, that's been the other comforting thing. We've been able to, the restrooms in Poland, especially at the McDonald's, have been very capacious and clean. Let me hear from Joyce and Joan and Ellen in that order.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi.
Hi. Before I ask my question, I just want to say that on the obvious level that we all thank you for being there, your being there is also kind of a balm for our own wounds of not being able to physically do anything. So thank you for representing us.
And thank you. And please know, everywhere I go, I bring them the love and the care of the entire community that I represent. And that's more than just the WRT community. And that's why going with 18 rabbis from the whole greater New York City area is so powerful. That's a lot of Jews that we're representing, a lot of people we're representing. So thank you, Joyce. It goes both ways.
I do have a question, which is, the news has been full the past couple of years with the rise of anti-Semitism all over the world, especially in Europe. And I am wondering if you have found any distinction between the treatment of Jews and non-Jews by anyone, by Polish, by Ukrainians, by anyone.
Thus far, no. And again, this can and has historically turned on a dime. It is, for many of us, I have colleagues on this trip whose family members were murdered by Poles, or whose family members were murdered by Nazis in Poland. So Poland is a very complicated place for Jewish people, as is Ukraine. Those of you who had the chance to either hear or read Rabbi Reeser's wonderful sermon from a couple of weeks ago got a wonderful education in some of the deep ways in which Jewish people are connected to Ukraine, both historically and in terms of our spiritual legacy and destiny. But there's also a very complicated history of Ukrainian anti-Semitism. And there are some people in some of the communities that some of my colleagues on this trip represent who've actually said to them, this is more in the Orthodox sector, by the way, and more in the oldest population, who've said, why would you, or extending compassion to Ukrainians is misplaced Rachmanis. Rachmanis is Yiddish through the Hebrew Rachmanut for compassion. Misplaced compassion to show compassion for Ukrainians. But there's a twofold answer, though. One, we have not heard about or directly experienced any anti-Semitism, and everyone on this trip is walking around Poland with yarmulkes. So that's one. Everywhere we've gone, we've been welcomed warmly. And in fact, we had an amazing conversation today in a McDonald's restroom with a German Pentecostal volunteer who was there doing relief work on the border, a young man probably in his mid-30s who has signed up for a week to help because I think he's a trained EMT. And he was so happy to have fellow people of faith, even though he, is not Jewish, he's a devout Christian. In terms of vice versa, by the way, it's also important to emphasize that every Jewish leader and every Jewish organization we've met with emphasizes that, with the exception of the Jewish Agency for Israel, which assists with making Aliyah, everybody is being assisted whether they are Jewish or not. In other words, if you are a refugee who finds her way to the Jewish Community Center of Warsaw, it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. They won't even ask you, are you Jewish? Some people will come and say, I'm not Jewish, can you help me? And the answer is, of course, or why should that matter? So the Jewish community is doing what the Jewish community does best, which is understand that every person is made in the image of God. As for, again, ordinary people, it's hard to know, and I'm sure we've seen a somewhat distorted slice of refugee assistance work in Poland. We know that, for instance, the Red Cross is very much out front in this effort. We did not interact directly with the Red Cross, but every Jewish organization we met with is coordinating closely with other humanitarian organizations that are either non-sectarian or based in other faith traditions. One of the most impressive kiosks at the border this morning was United Sikhs of the World, S-I-K-H-S, pronounced Sikh, not Sikh, but they are people with the turbans, you're probably familiar. So United Sikhs of the global community for humanitarian assistance. So that part has been really inspiring. Joan?
Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks that everyone has offered. That you're there and we're here, but we really appreciate everything that you're doing. My question goes to the psyche of the refugees.
Yeah.
You know, they've come over the borders with, you know, it looks like, you know, they have one rolling bag or a knapsack or something. They don't have clothes.
If
They
that.
don't have food. They don't have anything. Is there a feeling of panic?
I don't see
refugees,
panic. You know, I would say in 22 years of being a rabbi, I can read facial expressions pretty well, and particularly, you know, the different shades of challenging emotions. I sense worry, and I sense mostly weariness. These are people who have not slept. These are people who stood, you know, the weather here the last couple of days has been so refreshing and almost spring-like. Today it was in the low 50s and sunny. But last week it was brutally cold. And many of the refugees we interacted with today tried for 4 days to get across the border, waiting for 24 hours at a time outside. Sometimes somebody would say, oh, there's a call for you from such and so, and they would refuse to take the call for fear of losing their place in line, just to get on a train to cross the border. So they look more like people who've been through that than panic. There are trauma and crisis psychological counselors at every station that we went to, in every facility, both near the border and in the center of the Polish community. So if you know anyone who is able to give a week of one's time, who has special training in social work or counseling, volunteers like you are needed, and doctors as well. And there are organizations like Doctors Without Borders that are doing amazing work. I was incredibly moved that the first tent on the border at Mechka is a Israeli Hatzalah tent. So the very first flag that Ukrainian refugees see at this particular border crossing is the flag of the state of Israel. And the very conversation we had with the relief workers on the border, I'm talking 3 inches from the border. I posted a picture, you can see in the background, people on foot, probably a family of 5, all women and children, from probably, it looked like, you know, the babushka, the grandmother, mother, and a few children, one rolling suitcase between them that is smaller than the bag that I used to pack for 3 days of travel. As they crossed the border, the first conversation they had was with Hebrew-speaking Israelis. And we actually had our conversation in Hebrew. They speak English beautifully too. But that was another moment that was really heartening. But the need for psychological assistance and mental health counseling is just immense. So the impact of this will, you know, we will have people who are experiencing the PTSD of having lived through the bombardment of their city. We met a 95-year-old man whose son made Aliyah 2 months ago, who came back for his father. Doesn't speak a word of Hebrew, but he's making Aliyah tomorrow morning. his eyes say it all. He doesn't look panicked. He just looks, he looks so sad. I
So
mean,
is there,
most 95-year-old people I know, have a hard time being convinced to downsize from their house to a one-story, to an apartment. If they are told by their family they have to move. Imagine being told at age 95 you have to leave your home, but he was living by himself in an apartment in Kyiv. And his son came back from Israel to get him. Took him 3 days to get him across the border. 6 people in their entourage died of hypothermia. So that's the kind of stories that we were hearing this morning.
so Rabbi,
Really.
is there enough food and water as they're coming across? Are there enough bathrooms? I mean, you're saying people are standing on a line for 24 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like.
What we are told is that it is much harder on the Ukrainian side of the border. But the medical relief workers, the ones with the orange vests that we were loaned today, are able to drive across using ambulances and whatever other vehicles they can repurpose as emergency relief vehicles. They are setting up porta potties, but yeah, it's a refugee camp, and it's really. I was impressed at how much assistance was there, and how it was not squalor. And there are so many people there who are trying to keep things organized, but it is a grave humanitarian crisis. And so, again, sending money to an organization, even something like World Central Kitchen, WCK, is an amazing organization that needs money and they have set up kiosks all along the border and volunteers that are serving hot meals. So if you just make a donation to them, you can feed a Ukrainian family for days or weeks at a time with a not very large donation. I'm gonna take maybe 1 or 2 more hands. I know Vicky Asa had her hand up for a while. Victoria came to this country as a refugee from the Soviet Union and is a member of our congregation, who happens to live a block and a half from me in White Plains. So hi, neighbor.
Hi. I wanted to just for a second speak to what you said about the Russians. My parents have been in touch. We still have cousins who live in Kiev, and they haven't left. And we have other cousins who have actually escaped. And my parents have spoken to them, and they said that anyone that they know in Russia really has been influenced by a lot of misinformation about what's happening. And so many of them really don't know and don't understand what's happening and why it's happening. And they really believe that Ukraine is being saved somehow from Nazis, from nationalists, et cetera. And one of the things that my parents said that they noticed was that whenever they speak about the invasion, they only say Putin. They very rarely say Russia, which I think is pretty telling. But I just want to say thank you. This is really an amazing connection that we now have because of you. So thank you for being there.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I've heard from a few people who have shared with me that they still have family in Ukraine, and obviously are deeply concerned about them. I appreciate your closer to the ground perspective on that. Rebecca Eisenberg.
Hi, it's Marty, Jonathan. How
Hey,
are you?
Marty.
Hi.
Hey, guys.
It's great to see you, and again, appreciate everything you're doing. It was very moving to hear you say about how Israel is stepping up to the plate and bringing people trying to bring people in to make Aliyah. How about America? Where do you see that going? America taking in these refugees?
Right now, I'm going on pretty old information, by which I mean 2.5 weeks ago or so, where I heard that the State Department was preparing with the Biden administration's explicit support to open up for another 25,000 refugees from Ukraine. And I know from the numbers that we're hearing that, over 2 million are already refugees and millions more internally displaced out of a country of total population of 45 million. That 25,000 is perhaps a meaningful symbolic gesture, but is really just a drop in the bucket. Right. Having said that, again, one of the themes that we're hearing is at this stage of the crisis, most Ukrainian women and their small children are not entertaining the idea, so long as they are able to, they are not entertaining the idea of going very, very far distances. Some people who are Jewish have an added incentive to make Aliyah at this point. But even convincing Ukrainians to go away from Poland to countries that have open arms like France and the UK and the Netherlands, is they're not filling buses with refugees at this point because they're not willing to depart. Where that will be in a few weeks, I don't know, and what America's role will be in resettling refugees, I don't know, but I will salute the efforts of our own Global Refugee Assistance Committee, which is already, I understand, in deep conversations, was in conversations for the last several months about the possibility of resettling Afghanis who assisted Americans during the war effort in that part of the world. And so those efforts are ongoing. And if you'd like to get more involved with refugee assistance at WRT, there's probably somebody on this call who can take one of your emails. I see that, I know Karen Siegel's been involved in that. I see Jay Musoff is here. Or you can just write to office@wrtemple.org and we'll connect you with our amazing community of volunteers. We are looking for people in the WRT community, actively looking for people who would be willing to help coordinate refugee assistance efforts in Westchester County through WRT and our partner agencies. Whether those refugees will be Afghanis or Ukrainians, we don't know. We don't find out that information until the State Department tells us, which is very, very late in the game. I saw, I wanted to just, I'm only going to take one more comment. And I saw Hannah Schmelkin, I saw your comment. I'm going to contact you directly, but it's getting late, and at 11:30 after an hour, I need to cut it off so that I can be up really early for our last day. But I'm just so grateful. I feel so incredibly strengthened by your support, by your love. Please share this message. This Zoom is being recorded, so it will be available to those who might have wanted to participate but who couldn't. And I saw another hand up, but I just don't remember who it was. Oh, goodness. Somebody have a burning question? Get one more in. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, WRT. I feel the love of this spiritual family. I can't wait to be back with you. I'll be back before Pesach. All I know is that we're moving from Purim, which is this kind of hysterical holiday, and I'm using that word deliberately because it implies the cognitive dissonance that we feel about enforced merrymaking at a time when there's so much suffering staring us in the face. But we're moving from a hysterical holiday to a feast of liberation. And I know that every Seder table will be transformed this year in our community and across the Jewish world into a true table of liberation for all of God's children, particularly those who know the pharaohs of our own time. So thank you. Just God bless all of you. Oh, and I saw, is that Jonas, my brother-in-law, who had a comment? I think he got kicked out. I'll contact him directly too. Okay. Lots of love, everyone.
Thank
Stay
you.
well. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Bye. Thank you.